المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع أهل الإسلام، وجلت وعظمت مصيبتك في السماوات على جميع أهل السماوات. فلعن الله أمة أسست أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت، ولعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزالتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها، ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم، ولعن الله الممحدين لهم بالتمكين من قتالكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشياعهم وأتباعهم وأوليائهم. يا أبا عبد الله، إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم إلى يوم القيامة. ولعن الله آل زياد وآل مروان، ولعن الله بني أمية قاتبة، ولعن الله ابن مرجانة، ولعن الله عمر بن سعد، ولعن الله شمرا، ولعن الله أمة أسرجت وألجمت وتنقبت لقتالك. بأبي أنت وأمي لقد عظم مصابي بك، فأسأل الله الذي أكرم مقامك وأكرمني أن يرزقني طلب صارك مع إمام منصور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة. يا أبا عبد الله، إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بموالاتك وبالبراءة ممن قاتلك ونسب لك الحرب، وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس الظلم والجور عليكم. وأبرأ إلى الله وإلى رسوله ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانه وجرى في ظلمه وجوره عليكم وعلى أشياعكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم، وأتقرب إلى الله ثم إليكم بموالاتكم وموالاة وليكم، وبالبراءة من أعدائكم والناصبين لكم الحرب، وبالبراءة من أشياعهم وأتباعهم. إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم وولي لمن والاكم وعدو لمن عاداكم. فأسأل الله الذي أكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة، وأن يثبت لي عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة. وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله، وأن يرزقني طلب صاري مع إمام هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم. وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يؤتيني بمصابي بكم أفضل ما يعطي مصابا بمصيبته، مصيبة ما أعظمها وأعظم رزيتها في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض. اللهم اجعلني في مقامي هذا ممن تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد، ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إن هذا يوم تبركت به بنو أمية وابن آكلة الأكباد، اللعين ابن اللعين، على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله، في كل موطن وموقف وقف فيه نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية عليهم منك اللعنة أبد الآبدين. وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه السلام. اللهم فضاعف عليهم اللعنة منك والعذاب العليم. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقفي هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم وبموالاة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليه وعليهم السلام. Our intention is to recite one time for the 100th time. And everybody can recite with me as well. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن الإصابة التي جاحدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. Again, we intend to recite one time for 100. And everybody can join in. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني، وابدأ به أولا ثم العن الثانية والثالثة والرابع. اللهم لعن يزيد خامسا، ولعن عبيد الله بن زياد وابن مرجانة وعمر بن سعد وشمرا وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيامة. Please go to sajda. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين، لك على مصابحهم، الحمد لله على عظيم رزيتي. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود، وثبت لي قدم صدق عندك مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا محجهم دون الحسين عليه السلام. Salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to everyone here in person and those online. Once again, we're here together to prepare ourselves as we approach the peak of these nights and the deepest of sadnesses in the upcoming days, inshallah, and hopefully use that as not just as a destination, but a beginning point of further growth, inshallah. As always, we're going to start with a recitation of the Holy Quran. We'll bring up Taha Nabavi to lead us in that recitation. Let's send a loud salawat.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ولو أنا كتبنا عليهم أن اقتلوا أنفسكم أو اخرجوا من دياركم ما فعلوه إلا قليل منهم ولو أنهم فعلوا ما يوعظون به لكان خيرا لهم وأشد تثبيتا وإذا لآتيناهم من لدنا أجرا عظيما ولهديناهم صراطا مستقيما ومن يطع الله والرسول فأولئك مع الذين أنعم الله عليهم من النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين وحسن أولئك رفيقا ذلك فضل من الله وكفى بالله عليما يا أيها الذين آمنوا خذوا حذركم فانفروا ثبات أو انفروا جميعا وإن منكم لمن ليبطئن فإن أصابتكم مصيبة قال قد أنعم الله علي إذ لم أكن معهم شهيدا ولئن أصابكم فضل من الله ليقولن كأن لم تكن بينكم وبينه مودة يا ليتني كنت معهم فأفوز فوزا عظيما فليقاتل في سبيل الله الذين يشرون الحياة الدنيا بالآخرة ومن يقاتل في سبيل الله فيقتل أو يغلب فسوف نؤتيه أجرا عظيما صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Let's send one more loud salawat for Taha Nabawi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. So a heads up, as with past nights, if you're interested in the Farsi program, it's across in the blue hall there. So that's ongoing right now. Before we proceed, we want to recognize our sponsors for this evening. They are the families of Brother Shabaz Ali and Brother Hussain. We ask that you recite a Surah Fatiha for their marhumeen and the marhumeen of all of those present, inshallah. As with our past nights, inshallah, we're going to be having various lamentations, poems, short speeches. First, we're going to have a recitation of a poem from Qasim Jafri. We'll bring him up with a loud salawat.
Oh my Hussain, tell me, will I ever see you again? Brought to Kufa, they said that they were friends. I turn around, thousands prayed behind me, now an empty crowd. Now I'm all alone, how can I make you proud? From door to door, every knock I feel weaker as they ignore. I lose hope and finally fall to her floor. I stand and pray till break of day, wishing you'd stay. I'd give my life, I'd give my all. For her, I'd give my all, I'd give my soul. For Hussein's call, I'd give my life, I'd give my life. At Taw's home, praying all night that I won't be left alone. Morning comes and I'm betrayed, my fate's unknown. They call on me, a lion that they're facing, so I'll never flee. It would make you proud if only you could see. On me they close, showered with their swords and spears and then with stones. Your betrayal, that pain is worse than broken bones. I'll fight for you till my time's through. What will you do? I'd give my life, I'd give my all, I'd give my soul. For Hussein's call, I'd give my life, I'd give my life. They bind my hands, wounded so badly now I can barely stand. Dragged to their palace, my blood staining the sand. With them I've pled, I feel it inside me, soon we'll both be dead. Pour a cup of water, then it feels blood red. I say goodbye, turn towards Karbala and begin to cry. Tossed off the rooftop into the crimson sky. I beg and plead till I can't breathe that you won't leave. I'd give my life, I'd give my all, I'd give my soul for Hussein's call. I'd give my life, I'd give my life, I'd give my life. Salawat.
Ahsan, that was beautiful. My apologies for the wrong name. I used your father's name. That was beautiful. Let's send a loud salawat for Abbas Jafri. Next, we're going to have a short speech from Taha Navavi. We'll bring him up with a loud salawat. Taha Chawla. I'm getting all the names wrong today. I'm sorry to everybody.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. قال الله عز وجل: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ذلك الذي يبشر الله عباده الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى ومن يقترف حسنة نزد له فيها حسنا إن الله غفور شكور. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. In Surah Ash-Shura, ayah number 23, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Say, I do not ask of you any reward for it, but love for my near relatives." It is a commonly accepted standard in humanity that one can ask a reward for their actions. And the greater one's action is, the greater the reward he is entitled to. And we can see this in modern society, where a CEO in a company receives a greater salary than a regular employee. But the Prophet of Islam sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam, despite having the greatest role in mankind and having served so fervently that he was tortured by both the munafiqeen and the mushrikeen, he asks for only one thing, and that is al-mawaddata fil qurba. So what is mawadda? In Islam, we have the notion of al-muhabba wal-mawadda, and both of these are expressions of love. Al-muhabba is often considered a superficial or one-dimensional expression of love, while al-mawadda is where you express that al-muhabba of that person in your action. Al-Imam Al-Baqir says, a person who says he loves Imam Ali alayhi salam but does not follow him in his actions is not his Shia. Therefore, it is our duty to fulfill our own duty upon the Prophet, to model our actions upon the Ahlul Bayt. So to this we can look towards the words of the Ahlul Bayt. We have a hadith from our fifth Imam, Imam Muhammad Al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, narrated in various books such as the Amali of Shaykh al-Saduq, in which he lays out some of the actions that he expects the believers should have. The first of these is they are truthful, trustworthy, and loyal. The Imam explains that the Shi'as should have the traits of trust and loyalty. The next trait that he mentions is the Shi'as always remember Allah. And we see this in the Quran, this notion in the Quran that أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ, that the believers, they console their own hearts with the remembrance of Allah, not through other means. The Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The next trait of the believers that the Imam mentions is that they offer their prayers, observe fasts, and recite the Quran. And of course, these are traits that are mentioned often in the Quran, and we read these while we read the Quran. The next is one that we often overlook. It is they act nicely towards their parents. Often we say that we can pray, we can fast, we can do all of these rituals, but we cannot be nice to our parents. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala includes the mention of obedience to parents right after the mention of Tawheed. In Quran, in Surah Al-Isra, we see in ayah number 23, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. It has been decreed upon us to be kind towards our parents. The next two traits mentioned in this hadith are they help their neighbors take care of their neighbors, and they take care of orphans, and they say nothing but good of people. And the next trait is that they are worthy of people's trust and confidence. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to embody these actions in our life, to practice the mawadda of the qurba according to the teachings of the Prophet. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Let's send one loud salawat for Taha Chawla. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah. Next, we're going to have a salam from Muhammad Ibrahim, and we'll bring him up with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa salawat.
Stay, your mother wants you to smile. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. My son, O Qasim. My son, O Qasim. Qasim, I am your uncle and this is my battle. Qasim, tell me the yearning for death, why do you feel? Qasim, this is my tragedy, this is my trial. Qasim, don't let me hear another mother's wail. Qasim, don't let me hear another mother's wail. Stay, on me your mother's tears hail. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. My son, O Qasim. My son, O Qasim. Tell me your eyes see a path that before you beams. Tell me, is it your martyrdom or your mother's dreams? Tell me, for her emotions, what shall tomorrow deem? Tell me, will tears of joy or of grief from her eyes stream? Tell me, will tears of joy or of grief from her eyes stream? Stay, her heart is caught in a gale. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. My son, O Qasim. My son, O Qasim. Listen, she's a mother and every mother's the same. Listen, every day of your wedding your mother dreams. Listen, if this dream of hers impossible became. Listen, her heart would ache every time she heard your name. Listen, her heart would ache every time she heard your name. Stay, daily she'd recall this tale. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. My son, O Qasim. My son, O Qasim. Her eyes would wake in the morning longing for your sight. Her eyes saw as darkness but saw your face as light. Her eyes yearned the comfort of your eyes when left in fright. Her eyes, for but a glance of you the world they would fight. Her eyes, for but a glance of you the world they would fight. Stay, without your sight her skin pale. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. My son, O Qasim. My son, O Qasim. You go wearing your father's armor and his turban. You go whilst your mother prepares for you a coffin. You go, she throws away every marriage thought and dream. You go, her dreams die and become her tribulation. You go, her dreams die and become her tribulation. Stay is something she cries out while. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. Stay, you leave her to cry and wail. My son, O Qasim. My son, O Qasim. Salawat.
Ahsant. Let's send one more loud salawat for Muhammad Ibrahim. So, inshallah, a few announcements before we proceed with the lecture from our respected Shaykh. The first is, as with always, we want to make as much room as possible for everyone who's coming in later on. So I'd request that everybody's sisters and brothers move all the way up to the line. There's a blue carpet here that currently is completely unused. So ideally this would be full. Salawat. So I wanted to talk through the next few nights and some things that are going to be happening, some timing pieces, just so everyone is aware. The first is that tomorrow night and Saturday night, so that's the night of the 9th and the night of the 10th of Muharram, we'll be starting at 6:45 sharp, not 7 p.m. sharp. So everything is going to be shifted up about 15 minutes. So if you've noticed, we start exactly on time at 7. Ziyar Ashura ends around 7:10. It's going to be starting at 6:45 with that ending at 6:55, inshallah. That's tomorrow and Saturday night. The second thing I wanted to mention for tomorrow night, which is going to be the night of the 9th, is we're going to have our annual fundraising. So please try to make that. And be aware that we already have these flyers, which I'm going to show you up. You'll find them on the back there. These flyers are already up. So unlike previous years, you can pre-donate and already do all this work before the fundraising starts. So if you scan this QR code, you can then donate in advance for the fundraiser. You're already ahead of the game. Your donation is going to be incredibly important to us. It helps us sustain important masjid programs, empowering the faith of our community, increasing their knowledge, and so on. And so it's essential that you contribute, come in, and help us with that fundraising, inshallah. The last thing I wanted to remind everyone of is that on Sunday, that is the day of Ashura, inshallah. Because that is the day of Ashura, we're going to be starting the program at a different hall. I'm going to talk through the program, but the one point I wanted to flag for you is we've been saying it starts at 11. That start is now 12. Not 11, but 12 on the day of Ashura on Sunday. So at 12 p.m., we'll be doing A'mal at the Royal Banquet Hall in Springfield, Virginia. That's 6355 Rolling Road. Again, Springfield, Virginia, 12 p.m. on Sunday, July 6th. That program will go on with Dhuhr and Asr prayers, with the Majlis in English and in Urdu, and the breaking of the partial fast. At night, we will have a program here that starts at 7:30 p.m. for Sham Maghariban. So, Royal Banquet Hall in Springfield for the main program on the day of Ashura, then the program here, the Sham Maghariban program, starts at 7:30 p.m. at this masjid on Sunday. I hope that was all easy enough to follow. I'm going to request one more time that we shift up because I'm still seeing a lot of space. Let's come up again. Salawat. Okay. Inshallah, we're going to continue with our lecture series from our respected Shaykh Bilal Hussain. We've been incredibly fortunate to have him and learn from him these nights. Shaykh Bilal was born and raised in New York, where he completed his undergraduate studies at Temple University. Leaving a career in corporate finance, he spent 7 years studying in the Hawza in Najaf. He's currently serving the communities of New York and New Jersey as being in charge of the Beit al-Qaim Center in New Jersey. And he's also the managing director of the Zahra Trust USA, which does incredibly important work. We've been fortunate to have him, and we'll bring him up with a loud salawat.
رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين أما بعد فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من كفر بالله من بعد إيمانه إلا من أكره وقلبه مطمئن بالإيمان ولكن من شرح بالكفر صدرا فعليهم غضب من الله ولهم عذاب عظيم آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat for ta'ajil faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. Our conversation has been focused on the building of the virtuous community. And before we continue, inshallah, we mention a few points of fiqh as well too. Keeps getting ahead of myself in this process. When we talk about the fiqh of death and dying, and we talk about the rights of the deceased, there are some fundamental differences between how a person and their burial is executed. And it's important to note that one is a question of who should attend the funeral. From the mustahabbat is upon everybody to attend the funeral, and to attend the funeral of the mu'mineen, especially for the men. That, for example, a funeral that is attended by 40 believers, if 40 believers get together and pray for the marhum for his maghfirah, Allahumma la na'lamu minhu illa khayra wa anta a'lamu bihi minna faghfir lahu. This short dua, if it's narrated and 40 people recite this dua, and essentially what they do is they get together and they say, oh Allah, we don't know anything from this person except for goodness, and you know him better than we do, so forgive him. This short dua is similar to the dua that we recite in Salat al-Mayyit as well too. That in Salat al-Mayyit we recite the dua where we say, Allahumma inna hadha abduka min ibn abdika wa ibn amatik. And then we say that this is a servant of yours from one of your serving men and serving women, and he has passed away and we don't know anything from him except for goodness. And then if you know of anything other than that, forgive him, otherwise raise his goodness even more. If 40 people get together and pray over a mu'min with this dua, Allah says everything's forgiven. 40 people. So therefore the participation, if we want 40 people in our janazah, then you go to everybody's janazah that you can to give them that comfort. However, what's interesting is there's no istihbab for women to participate in the janazah. It's not mana, it's not forbidden, but it's not recommended. There's a reason for this, by the way. The reason for this points back to, again, that our actions are not for the living, they're for the deceased. That for the deceased, our goal is that moment of burial is not an emotional moment. Emotion is for the living. Emotion doesn't assist the person who's deceased. Our goal when we go to the graveyard is fulfill the rites to the best of the ability, assist this person through the process of transitioning to the next phase of life, and not make it about dunya. Imagine, up until a day ago, you had bills to pay, you had obligations, you had a job, you had family relations, you had all of these things that you managed. And now all of a sudden I have to tell you, don't pay attention to any of these things, and only focus on what's coming next. The marhum, the deceased, is still attached to us, and they're still aware, the awareness is still present. So therefore, if we are focused on, for example, our affairs, if we're focused on material affairs, or we're focused on the emotionality of the experience, we're distracting the mayyit from focusing on the process that they need to go through. We're reminding them of dunya when we need to be reminding them of akhirah, which is the same reason why when someone is in those final phases of life, they're in ihtidar, you don't talk about worldly affairs around them. You don't talk about who's going to take care of what and what responsibility. The same thing, one of the mistakes that happens is we go to the graveyard and we start talking about, oh, how's your job going? Did you find a new investment property? Are you looking at something new? Or my car is giving me trouble? But that's not the conversation that takes place in the graveyard, and especially not at the time of burying somebody. That moment is focused upon assisting that person through this phase, praying for that individual, doing dhikr for that individual, making sure that we give them the talqeen and the reminder of what's coming ahead and go through this process, which is why the recommendation is lifted off of the women. Why? Because it's a painful and emotional process. And to tell you that you're not allowed to be emotional in that moment, why expose you to a moment you're not allowed to be emotional in? You're naturally supposed to be emotional in that moment. And you're going to harm the person that you love more than you help them through this process, which is why the istihbab, it's not mana. You can still go, but with the instruction, understanding whether it's a woman or a male, that's not the time for emotion. Emotion comes afterwards. And the reason for this is that Allah's system of the Day of Judgment is very organized. If we can be organized, Allah is always better organized than us. And the way that I explain this very simply is, take a look and see that how Allah describes the Day of Judgment. On the Day of Judgment, Allah says, يَوْمَ نَدْعُ كُلُّ أُنَاسٍ بِإِمَامِهِمْ. Day of Judgment, every person will be called by their Imam. But Allah doesn't ask you who's your Imam. You don't get to choose at that moment who your Imam is. Imam Sadiq explains the first thing, there's 50 stations of the Day of Judgment. The first station, أول ما سئل به يوم القيامة الصلاة إن قبلت قبلت ما سوى وإن ردت ردت ما سوى. The first thing you'll be asked about on the Day of Judgment is your prayers. If your prayers are accepted, then everything is accepted. And if your prayers are refused, then nothing will be accepted. Baba, where's my Imam? Allah has a filing system that begins at the moment of death. As soon as you die, Munkar and Nakir come to you. And look at the questions that Munkar and Nakir ask. They don't ask you, did you pray? Did you fast? Did you do ibadah? Did you pay your khums? No, they ask you, who is your God? What is your book? What was your qibla? Who was your prophet? Who is your imam? They're preparing you to show you where you stand up on the Day of Judgment. This is why that moment of death, that environment of going to the grave is one of the most difficult things, because if you mess this up, and you can't answer these questions correctly, then on the Day of Judgment, who you stand up with is who you spend the rest of eternity with. So if, for example, I come in, and now it's time for me to explain which filing system, which directory I want to go in, and I'm supposed to answer the questions about talking about Imam Zaman, and talking about Quran, and talking about the Kaaba, and talking about the Prophet, and instead I'm worried about, oh, my poor kids, my poor wife, my poor children, my poor brother and sister, my relatives. And I'm thinking about them, and I'm not thinking about what Munkar and Nakir are going to ask me. I'm going to make a mistake. And there's no going back from that mistake. This is why the environment at the graveyard when we go to bury someone is supposed to be very specific, very focused, very precise, quick, responsibly executed, and out. So as that we're not the distraction that makes it difficult for someone to go through this process, because of how important it is. And this is why we have the habit of what's called talqeen, the reminder, to remind the person that after this moment you're about to be asked these really important questions, you should know how to answer them. And this is why one of the discussions, that one of the most important things you can study in your life, every human being, is answering the questions pertaining to Usuluddin. Why do I believe in one God? Why do I believe God is just? Why do I believe that there is prophethood? And how am I sure, beyond a doubt, that there is a prophet, and I believe in that prophet, and that Allah definitely communicated with us, and that Allah will definitely hold me accountable? Because in that moment of transition is when you will actually have to be able to defend this position. If you don't really believe it, do you think you're going to think of it in that moment? Think about it. Today, so many things of Allah's creation are hidden from us. We can't see them. After death, that curtain's lifted. You can see the good, you can see the bad, and you'll see the malaika for the first time in your life and existence. And seeing the malaika is not an easy thing. There's a narration of Nabi Ibrahim who says, Ya Allah, you have told me that death is a truth and Malikul Maut will come for taking my soul. I want to meet him. Ibrahim says, it's not me, I don't want to meet Ibrahim. Keep me away from him. As long as I have to, inshallah. Maut huwa al-haq. When the time comes, then I'll deal with him. But until then, I don't want to meet him. Jibreel says, are you sure? Ibrahim says, yeah, I want to know who will take my soul so that the fear from this aspect disappears from me. The description writes that Ibrahim, upon laying sight upon Malik al-Maut, immediately loses consciousness because of the frightfulness of Malik al-Maut. Why? The concept of looking at Munkar and Nakir, don't think it's going to be something easy and friendly. It may be because of your iman and the certainty you have in your faith that it's possible, but don't count on it until you've prepared for it. So that's it. This is the reason why the effects that we have in why I said, from the moment a person dies till they're buried and they enter into that process of accounting, it's not about us who are alive anymore. It's about making sure that we facilitate this process of accounting so the person who's about to go through this phase has it as easy as possible, that we supported that individual through a really difficult decision process, a really difficult time in their existence. And which is why these effects, and why when you see that there's, for example, certain ahkam prescribed and others that are avoided, it's to make sure that it's as easy as possible. Which is why there's a very interesting difference. When it comes to, for example, the men, to bury a person who's a male, it's recommended the act of lowering the body, covering the dirt in the body, doing all these things is done by people other than the relatives. For the family, it's difficult. It's challenging. But for women, it's the exact opposite. That if a woman passes, then her mahram, whoever her mahram is, if there are any, then they should be the one who take the responsibility for burying her. And if there is no mahram alive at that point in time, then it should be those who are from the raham, from the relatives, who take this responsibility. And then, na'uzubillah, God forbid, someone's in the situation that there's no one from the relatives, then the community takes the responsibility. Do you know why it's exactly opposite? One is no relatives, one is absolutely relatives. Is because while we want to give mercy to the relatives that they don't have to go through this difficult emotional process, that mercy to the relatives is second to the responsibility of the modesty, the haya and the hijab of a woman. That the hijab of a woman is preserved even in that instance, that only her mahram is associated with that process. And in the case of a man where there isn't a question of mahramiyat, it's recommended that it should be non-family who takes care of this responsibility and lowers them into the grave and goes through this process so as to alleviate the difficulty and the emotionality of this process. Everything in Islam makes a lot of sense if you put it into context, including these affairs that we talk about of death and dying. And inshallah we'll mention some more tomorrow inshallah as well. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In our discussion around building the righteous community, we've come to a point where we've talked about a variety of different issues, and tonight's discussion is around how do we protect this community? You may ask the question, why is protection a topic of discussion? If it's a righteous community, why does it require protection? Shouldn't it be that if it's a righteous community, it stands in front and promotes and invites and brings people to the forefront to participate in this good cause? Which would make sense. However, there is a historical context and instruction that tells us that as you build an element in society that loves Ahlul Bayt, follows their teachings, one of the obligations that you possess is to protect this community and ensure its survival in society. And the precedent for this, right, because precedent is establishment of why we go through some systems. There are three different descriptions of why protection became a necessary discussion when talking about that the righteous community, the followers of Ahlul Bayt, when they collect together and want to bring change in society, one of the elements you have to take into consideration is how do I protect and preserve this community? The first of this is the danger from competing ideologies to destroy the position of Ahlul Bayt. The persecution of minorities that can take place. That if, for example, the ideology is a minority in the society, that there is a chance that remains that those who are in power and authority will wipe out this minority opinion. Second to that is that as this minority exists, it's not just a minority that wants to exist, but rather it wants to be an objecting minority. Meaning that when Islam is found to be violated by the positions of power and authority, this community makes it an insistence that we stand up to preserve the true values of Islam and that we don't ignore the values of Islam, which again endangers that community. That when you decide to stand up and preserve the true values of Islam, that if you see someone who is, for example, violating the principles and says, I'm speaking for Islam, but I violate these principles, we have to stand up and say that, no, you don't speak for Islam, and that's one of the obligations that we possess. Therefore, there's an insistence on those who may try to usurp and abuse authority to try and remove such an objecting minority. So therefore, we have to ensure, how do we make sure this minority persists and can't be wiped out? Second, when we believe that the authority of the Ahlul Bayt is absolute, and they have authority over us in both physical and spiritual matters, that physical authority that they possess is in defiance to a political authority. For example, the systems of khums, the systems of zakat. If they are paid to the imam directly, in spite of there being a khalifa or a political authority that exists, the consequence is that that authority will attempt to wipe out this system. And we saw this in history. For example, in the life of our seventh Imam Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kadhim alayhi salam, Harun needed an excuse to imprison Imam al-Kadhim. The excuse was what? That one of the relatives of Imam al-Kadhim comes to Harun and explains and says that Musa ibn Ja'far possesses large amounts of money that were given to him by the followers of Ahlul Bayt, that he has enough resources that have been collected by him to go out and to purchase and to finance an entire army against you and overthrow your system of governance. And when this was established in fact, by showing the example that Imam al-Kadhim wanted to buy a piece of land that was worth 50,000 dinars or a greater amount, and Imam al-Kadhim presented money of 50,000 dinars, which is not a simple amount of money, the seller said, no, I don't want dinars of this currency, I want a different currency, and Imam al-Kadhim immediately provided the second system of currency. And this was enough of a threat to the khulafa of the time that they turned around and said, Harun turns and says that, no, then I have to imprison him, I have no choice, because he possesses sufficient resources to go and attack me. So understanding this, there's a requirement to figure out how do we protect that if we are paying into a system that disagrees with the political system, that, for example, wants control of Islamic resources, how do we make sure that the actual system persists and therefore it has to be protected? The third is that there are always elements of heresy or, for example, destructive efforts to misguide the upright community. Where we look at the different sects like the Fatahiyya that came up. The Fatahiyya saw that there were resources in Islam. The Waqifiyya saw there were resources in Islam. And they said, we want these resources, why should we redirect them to Imam Rada? There were those who disagreed with the actual authority of Islam, and then therefore they intended to say that, no, these aren't the actual authority of Islam, let's take this somewhere else. Therefore, the idea that there can be those who will try to corrupt the system for the nature of their own benefit, you have to have a system of checks and balances to make sure that the system persists, remains protected through society. So now the question comes, what are the resources that exist within Islam that acknowledge and understand that those who are the followers of the Ahlul Bayt or who want to establish the righteous community will be the minority, and how do we ensure that the minority persists in spite of all of the dangers that exist of the time? And Allah has already established this system within Islam, and all we have to do is follow that system to make sure that the message of Ahlul Bayt remains in any society that we live in. There are 4 of these areas, and we'll mention each of them with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There's a request again that we move forward, please, if you don't mind, as people continue to file in, make space for those to join the Majlis of Aba Abdullah. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد صل على محمد وآل محمد. The first of these elements that's used to protect the society of the lovers of Ahlul Bayt and those who follow the message of Islam is called dissimulation. Dissimulation is the English word for the Arabic concept of taqiyya. This concept within itself is probably the most polarizing element of tonight's discussion, which is why we're going to spend the most amount of time on it. Taqiyya essentially means that if there is danger presented to me, I have the permission and ability to hide my faith to make sure that my life and my safety is guaranteed. This concept is something that Allah describes in the Quran. And He describes it in the Quran in response to something that happens to one of the true, pure companions of the Holy Prophet, Ammar ibn Yasir. The first shuhada in Islam are the parents of this Ammar. And what happens is his family of 3 people is captured and they're persecuted and tortured. And his parents die from that torture, known as the first shuhada in Islam. And Ammar, when he is forced to and said that we'll kill you if you don't claim that you disbelieve in Allah and claim that you believe in polytheism, Ammar does this and saves his life. And when he makes it back to Rasulullah, he has regrets that why, Rasulullah forgive me, but they were going to kill me if I didn't do this. Allah is the one who answers. And He says in this verse of Surah An-Nahl, من كفر بالله من بعد إيمانه إلا من أكره وقلبه مطمئن بالإيمان. Allah comes and He says, he who disbelieves in Allah after his having believed. And then Allah specifies, not the one who is compelled while his heart is at rest on account of faith. Meaning Allah tells us and says that if your heart is at faith, if they compel you to disbelieve, it doesn't affect you. There's no consequence in terms of the harm that came to your soul because of this. This is the first implementation within the religion of Islam of the concept of taqiyya. Within the history of religion itself, the concept of taqiyya is present before as well too. When, for example, we can take a look at Mu'min of Ali Fir'aun, the believer in the people of Fir'aun who went and protected Musa alayhi salam from being attacked. Take a look at even, for example, the mu'min of Ali Yasin in Surah Yasin, which talks about the mu'min and the believer who comes to the guide and the protection of the messengers, or the Hawariyun of Isa alayhi salam who came to guide the people. The Hawariyun came protecting and hiding their religion into a community that bore animosity towards them. The concept of, for example, dissimulation and hiding what your true belief is to bring protection or for safety is something that existed even from the beginning of Islam, which is why, for example, the Ahlul Bayt, when they talked about this, they didn't say we came up with this. At-taqiyyatu dini wa dinu abai. That taqiyya is my religion and the religion of my forefathers. Man la taqiyyata lah, la dina lah. One who does not possess dissimulation or taqiyya has no faith in iman. ما عبد الله بشيء أفضل من التقية. There is no action through which Allah has been worshipped that is more appreciated to Him than taqiyya. You see, many times we look at taqiyya as a very selfish process. And the selfish process is what? Is that you're going to harm me, so therefore I hid my religion. But one of the uses of taqiyya is to introduce the exposure to Islam through normalization and familiarity, to create harmony amongst the people, to introduce them to a concept that they have been turned against. You see, when a society is to be corrupted against a concept, I don't talk about it, I vilify it. And I vilify it to an extreme that nobody wants to talk about it, and anybody who brings it up is my enemy. Shall I give you an example? Yeah? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. If you've been watching movies and TVs over the past 20 years, who's the villain? It's always an Arab guy. It's always a brown guy. Screams Allahu Akbar and does something horrible. Do you know why? It was to create a bias in the minds of the American society that Muslims are not human. They hate you, they want to kill you, they want to destroy you. Today, many people in America, because remember something, Muslims represent 2% of the US population. 2%, that's it. 2% of 330 million is about 6 million. About, give or take, maybe 7 million if you really want to be giving. There are 7 million Muslims in this country and 323 million non-Muslims. The only exposure that they have to Islam is the news and the media. The news and the media intentionally vilified the concept of Islam so that when, for example, foreign wars are performed on these people, there's no value to their life because they're considered to be my enemy from the fact that they exist. Now turn around, and unfortunately our women have dealt with this more than our men, is you walk into society as a Muslim. What happens? Do they like you? Do they think well of you? Do they think you're good people? No, they hate you. They don't know anything about you. But what happened? The water was corrupted. There was filth established in the ideology, and then therefore now at this point in time, the example of Islam that comes to their mind is what's on Fox News. What's being represented, that these people are trying to hurt you and kill you. What media showed them? That always the one who's trying to hurt you and kill you is the Muslim. And which is why it's very important to realize something. In America, there is a very good probability that for a lot of people, you'll be the only Muslim they ever meet in their life. The only one. How are you going to interact with them? Now take that same concept and apply it to throughout the history of those who established the Khulafa and established these dynasties and these empires, and who saw the Ahlul Bayt as a threat to them and to their power and authority. What did they do? But Umayyah were fantastic. Muawiyah was a very smart, though evil man, who knew how to vilify the Ahlul Bayt and the belief in the Ahlul Bayt, so that anyone who attached themselves to the Ahlul Bayt was considered to be a bad person. When you hear the statement that, for example, when Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, was struck inside Masjid Kufa, when the news spread, Ahl Sham, what do they say? Ali used to pray? What was Ali doing in a masjid? It was because of this process of vilifying and creating animosity. Now, if someone, for example, looks at you just by your face and can't acknowledge the fact that you could be a good person, or maybe they've been misled and maybe that they've been taught the wrong thing, and you come up and you present them full force that this is my ideology and this is who I am, there's no way they're going to listen to you. They're going to hate you right from the first word and say, everything you say is lies to me. The concept of taqiyya and the concept of dissimulation was create unity, familiarity, and then introduce the concept that may be hard for someone to believe and understand because of the lies and misinterpretations that they've been given. Which is why we have a statement from our sixth Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq alayhi salam, where he begins and he goes, اتقوا على دينكم وأحيوه بالتقية فإنه لا إيمان لمن لا تقية له. He begins and he says, fear for your religion and keep it alive by means of pious dissimulation or taqiyya. Certainly faithless is he who does not practice taqiyya. That to have faith, you have to practice this taqiyya. Among the people, you, the Shia, the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, are just like bees amongst birds. Had birds known what there is in the abdomens of bees, they would have eaten them completely. Meaning that a bee holds nectar. What does a bird do? Hummingbirds and all these other, they collect the nectar and they eat it. Imam Al-Asr draws a parallel. He says the same way that the bee doesn't disclose what's in his stomach, otherwise the birds would eat it. The same way, had people known what you carry in your hearts concerning the love for us, the Ahlul Bayt, they would have eaten you with their tongues and disgraced you overtly and covertly. May Allah have mercy upon the servant from you who abides by the terms of loyalty to us. This statement of our sixth Imam is explaining that if you want to bring guidance into society, it's going to be through the process of not by showing everything that you possess immediately, but rather gradually introducing the concept to allow for the familiarity and acceptance of the concept in society. Now you may think that, for example, this is a rash decision. However, take a look and see that we even see in the story of Ibrahim. When Ibrahim goes to his people and he says, what are you worshipping? Let me worship with you. And he goes and he worships, and then he brings about the shortcoming. If Ibrahim had gone from the beginning and said, all of you are fools, you have no idea what you're doing and you're all wrong, would they have been open to the ideological difference that Ibrahim presented? That when they worship stars and the stars went down, he says, Why worship something that disappears and can't be there with me all the time? When they worship the sun, it says, oh, this is greater than the other one. This is pretty good. It's a good thing. Let's worship this together. And what? The sun disappeared. And he says, this one goes away too? Why are you guys so busy worshiping something that can't be there for you 24/7 when you need it? And therefore he gives the explanation. He says, I won't worship that which can't be with me all the time. That which disappears cannot be my Lord. What is Ibrahim doing? When, for example, we talk about his cutting off the heads of the idols, and then when they come asking, and he says, well, why don't you go ask the big idol? No one touched its head. Maybe it knows anything about it. People said, you fool, how could an idol tell us anything? If he had gone from the beginning and just simply said to them that, oh, you have no idea what you're talking about, and Allah is the one, what would have happened? Would the intellectual proof have been presented against the people to teach them about what they were doing wrong? No, the precedent for this is a system of protecting faith by, for example, not disclosing everything that we know, or, for example, normalizing and creating a harmonious, similar environment before showing them what's different in us, is something that was one of the precedents, and which is why the religion of Allah is the religion of taqiyya. That how was faith introduced in every society and every time? By first harmonizing and creating similarity, and then showing a better path when there was trust in a society and in people. And this is the way that we protect the faith. Now, what are the options that you could have used instead of this? Right? And there are a few other options that could have been, instead of taqiyya being the primary path of protecting the religion of Islam. One is that you could flee and leave. And this is what happened in the time of the Bani Israel, and what happened that you wound up with monks and monasteries and these people who isolated themselves from society. Why? Because society refused to accept their faith and belief. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was riding with the Holy Prophet, and Rasulullah goes to him and he asks him that, do you know how this process of asceticism and monasticism began amongst the Bani Israel, and then after that the Christians? Abdullah ibn Mas'ud says, no, I don't know. Rasulullah explains, and he says that in the time when the kings began to take over the tribes of the Bani Israel, those who were truly pious went and left and separated themselves and became hermits and created for them small isolation away from society. And this eventually led to the practice of monasticism and being monks and being those who, for example, see themselves as separate from the rest of society. And their goal at that time was to wait for the coming of Rahmatul lil Alameen. But by their separation and going through this effort, instead of them, for example, bringing a good change, not only did they not change society and prepare society for the coming of Rahmatul lil Alameen, but many amongst themselves became corrupted. And then when Rasulullah came, they didn't follow the religion. So therefore, if, for example, we fled society and we went out on our own and created our own little separate enclaves that are completely away from humanity and do nothing with people, people tried it, it didn't work. The other option instead of taqiyya was the idea of, for example, have conflict, clash, stand up and revolt and rebel and fight against them. But the consequence of that is that if you fail, it's the annihilation and extermination. It's also deemed as creating your own people to be extremists, that you're either with us or against us. We have to stand in conflict at all times. Well, the consequence of that is that I can never humanize or allow somebody to join the right path. It'll never happen that these numbers increase or that people come to the love of Ahlul Bayt and the Hidayah of Allah. Remember something, Allah created all of us to go to heaven. All of us. Your goal in existence is one, go to heaven. Every human being was created with the intention that you go to heaven. Which is why Amir al-Mu'mineen would describe as you were created for heaven, don't sell your soul for anything less. So why is it that if I found the path and I have it, that the consequence is that everybody else should not have it? Why should I stand in such a conflict that I don't want as many people to receive hidayah and guidance and come to the path of Ahlul Bayt? Therefore, standing in conflict or in clash with society isn't a good solution either. The option that makes the most sense of these is the concept of taqiyya. That I can stay within a society, I can create harmony, and I can present the opinion of the righteous and the guidance of the righteous and make the counterpoint in the mentality of the individual that Fox News tells me that all Muslims are evil. Imagine that if we could create the counterpoint, but Abdullah's my neighbor. Abdullah's not evil. He lends me his lawnmower. Or I get nihari from my neighbors. They're good people. It's good food. and I start to create the counterpoint in the mind of society, not only does that allow me to persist in society, but it allows me to be a positive influence within society. So hence the concept of taqiyya is not something that, for example, is an extremist ideology, or you only want to apply it in one circumstance when someone's standing over your head with a gun and saying, you believe in Satan, if you don't believe in Satan, I'm going to kill you, and it's like, hail Satan. No, that's not the concept. The concept is how do we protect ourselves and our ideology and continue to create a positive movement in the world? And that comes through the process of this concept of taqiyya. The second tool for protection, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Is in the don't divulge the secrets of Ahlul Bayt. Not divulging secrets is different than taqiyya. In taqiyya is where, for example, we don't tell who we are. In not divulging secrets is we don't tell everything that we possess. We withhold information in that process. There's no disclosure. That dissimulation is the aspect of hiding something, and the other is the absence of disclosure. Since people were ignorant about learning about the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, that if you told them everything about the Ahlul Bayt without context, instead of loving the Ahlul Bayt, they would hate the Ahlul Bayt. We see, for example, that this was a system used by the Banu Umayyah, was that when they wanted to corrupt a people, they would prevent them from certain types of knowledge, so that the consequence would be that when they expose that knowledge, they can be corrupt by it. Our sixth Imam would explain and says, Inna bani Umayyata atlaqu linnasi an yata'allamu al-iman wa lam yutliqu lahum an yata'allamu al-shirk hatta idha hamaluhum alayhi lam ya'rifuhu dhalik. So the Banu Umayyah were very clever. Imam Sadiq explains that the Banu Umayyah, what they did in their dynasty is that they gave the people the freedom to learn about faith in only one ideology. But they didn't let them learn about polytheism and shirk. So that when the Banu Umayyah wanted to corrupt them with polytheism, the people would not realize it. So meaning this concept of withholding information was something that was used by the enemies, and it's used by us, the mu'mineen, as well too. That if, for example, we disclosed every affair of the Ahlul Bayt, it would be too extreme for people to be able to understand and appreciate. And that instead of appreciating it, they would run away from this. There's a hadith that I like to share on this topic to give an explanation of how this is true. You guys want to hear hadith? There's also a request to move forward. If you move forward, I'll tell you hadith. Let's go. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In Hadith Qudsi, Allah, in speaking to the Holy Prophet, gives the statement. He says, "Lawla khalaqtuka ya Rasulullah, ma khalaqtuka." If I didn't create you, O Prophet of Allah, I would not have created the earth. And the second statement of this hadith is, "Walawla khalaqtu Ali ma khalaqtukuma." If I had not made Ali, I would not have made you, ya Rasulullah, and I would not have made the earth. And then he goes further and he says, "Walawla khalaqtu Fatima ma khalaqtu qat." And if I didn't make Fatima, I would have made nothing. There are those who listen to this and they say, how is that possible? How does that make sense? And the idea is that we should be able to interpret everything without any kind of prerequisite or definition or explanation. And that's it. People look at this hadith and they say, you, the lovers of Ahlul Bayt, are crazy. That you've come up with these things and this is why we call you heretics. But there's actually a very good consequential reason of how this hadith works and why Allah makes this statement and why nothing is superseding the right of the Prophet in this hadith. Why? Allah says that if I had not created you, Ya Rasulullah, I would not have created the world. intellectually, if there's no way for humanity to come to rahmah, to mercy of Allah, then that means that humanity and everything in this earth was always to be doomed. Allah says, when I created the earth, I made sure that there was a rahmah and a mercy that could encompass all of humanity. Then I created humanity so that they could be attached to my mercy. The second statement of the hadith, now that we know that humanity, the world exists because it has the ability to receive the mercy of Allah. The second statement, لَوْلَا خَلَقْتَ عَلِي مَا خَلَقْتُكُمَا, that if it not had been for Ali, I would not have made either you, Ya Rasulullah, or humanity. Rasulullah was a normal human being in the sense that he had the lifespan of a human being. What happens to humanity after the Prophet dies? Does that mean that the people who came after the Prophet are not entitled to the mercy of Allah? The rahmah of Allah is cut off from all of us and we are mazloom, oppressed, and there's no way? No, Allah explains and He says, because I created a way for your mercy to reach humanity after you, then it was worth me bringing humanity the benefit of rahmatul lil alameen. Our Prophet would defend this position by saying, لَوْلَا أَنْتَ يَا عَلِي لَمْ يُعْرِفَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ بَعْدِي. That had it not been for the example of you, Ali, there would have been no way to know who is a true believer after me. Meaning Rasulullah explained that to be attached to my mercy, the only path to me is through Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad. وَلَوْلَا فَاطِمَةَ مَا خَلَقْتُ قَطْ. And if it had not been for Fatima, I would have made nothing. Well, after Amir al-Mu'mineen, how does the guidance of Rasulullah, how does the example of Ali ibn Abi Talib reach us? It's through the sons of Sayyidah Zahra. And that the sons of Sayyidah Zahra are the hujjah of Allah on this earth and the continuation of that mercy on humanity after the example of the Prophet. That there has to be some way for us to connect to the mercy of Rasulullah, and if there wasn't, then there was no point of any of creation, because there was no way for people to receive guidance, and that guidance was cut off from people. Which is why a hadith like this, to explain it to somebody who doesn't know the Ahlul Bayt, to disclose this publicly in front of people, would be something that would lead to the consequence of them calling this heresy. But if we had the opportunity to explain the responsibilities and show what does the Ahlul Bayt do, how do they continue the message of Rasulullah, to show that we can find the answers to the problems in society by the example of those who taught us the example of Rasulullah, then this hadith makes sense. Which is why keeping the secrets of Ahlul Bayt, keeping the secrets of the Anbiya is one of the ways in which that the true message is protected. We see in the hadith of Ahlul Bayt where they explain, وَيَقْتُلُونَ الْأَنْبِيَاءَ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ أَمَّا وَاللَّهِ مَا قَتَلُوهُمْ بِأَسْيَافِهِمْ وَلَكِنْ أَضَاعُوا عَلَيْهِمْ وَأَفْشَوْا سِرَّهُمْ فَقُتِلُوا. They explain and say that when Allah gave the explanation in the Quran and said that they slay the prophets unjustly, in Surah Al Imran, verse number 112, وَيَقْتُلُونَ أَنْبِيَاءَ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ, that they kill the prophets unjustly, Imam Sadiq explains, he said, I swear to God, they didn't slay the prophets with their swords, rather they divulged the secrets of the Anbiya and announced their activities, and as a result of this, the prophets of Allah throughout history were killed and slain. The process that not everything is disclosed for everybody. The same way today, if you take a child in high school and put him in a 400 level chemistry class, nothing makes sense to him. The same way, not every affair is to be disclosed at every level, and it's the responsibility of the one who has faith to determine what are the right topics to discuss and when to discuss them and how to discuss them. Our Imam goes even further. وَالدِّدُّ وَاللَّهِ لَوْ افتديت خِسْلَتَيْنِ في الشِّيعَةِ لَنَا بِبَعْضِ لَحْمِ السَّاعِدِ. Imam goes so far, he says, I wish I could give a ransom of some of my arm's flesh for two traits that our Shia must get rid of. Imam Sadiq is saying, he would give his flesh to make sure that there were two things that we stopped. One is recklessness, and the other is the lack of the concealment of our secrets. That not every affair is intended for everybody. You have to be careful of making sure that the right affair is revealed at the right time. And it's the consciousness and the responsibility of everybody. Not everything belongs in the public sphere. Be careful of it. Ensure that you are conscious of what are you disclosing and what are you exposing in terms of the message of Ahlul Bayt. And remember, today is even more sensitive than before. Because now you don't need somebody to sit there and watch. You just plug in AI and they come back and report everything that's going on in our communities. So you have to be careful. There has to be censorship. There has to be something that takes the precautions very seriously. The third technique of protecting our community, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, is the concept of working with the government. And this is very interesting because we have the examples of personalities like Safwan ibn Jamal, Safwan al-Jamal. Safwan was somebody who, today you have car rental places, Safwan was a camel rental place. And Safwan in the time of Harun would rent, of the Khulafa, would rent his camels to the Khulafa. When the Imam sees him and he speaks to him, he says, Safwan, everything you do is good except for one thing. He says, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, what's the one bad thing that I do? He says, you rent your camels to the Khalifa. Safwan says, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, I only rent him the camels to go to Hajj. I don't rent him camels for anything else. The Imam replies, he says, but let me ask you something. When he takes your camels and leaves, do you pray that you get your camels back? He says, yeah, it's my property. I do pray for it to come back to me. I pray for my property to be safe. He says, by this action, you pray for the safety of the dhalim who has usurped our right. So Safwan, what does he do? He turns around, sells all of his camels and liquidates his business and gets out of business. And he says, then I won't do such a business that by my doing this business, I'm praying for the dhalim. This is one example of where you're seeing the statement of the Imam is saying that even, for example, renting a camel to a dhalim, even if it's for Hajj, is going against us in a bad thing. On the other side, you have examples of Ali ibn Yaqteen, who is appointed to the head office and leading the government of the Abbasids. And you have other examples of other people. Remember something, Imam Al-Kadhim implemented many people into the governmental system of the Abbasid. As the Abbasid dynasty was starting, and they needed reliable people to work for them, and they were from the Banu Hashim as well too, they looked for others like them to implement into positions of powers, and Imam Al-Kadhim sent many. But he sent them all with the condition that if you take on this responsibility, you take on this responsibility only with the intention of serving the mu'mineen. And this is why there's a narration of a person by the name of Hassan ibn Hussain al-Anbari, who was in the time of Imam al-Rada. And he says, the Khulafa had been pressuring me for 14 years that I take a position in the government. And for 14 years, I kept writing to Imam Rada and asking him, can I be a part of the government? And for 14 years, the Imam refused me. Until eventually, I wrote to Imam Rada a letter. And I said, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, they're threatening to kill me now. Because for 14 years, I have refused their demand that I join the government. Ya Ibn Rasulullah, give me instruction. Am I to die in this situation? Or may I work with the government? Imam Rada writes him a reply. And he says, listen, I understand your letter and I am conscious of the fear for your life. I know if you hold this office that you will do what Rasulullah has commanded of you, and that in this office you must make sure that you choose your brethren in faith to be your agents and clerks, and you share whatever you gain with the poor, faithful mu'mineen as if you are one of them. You can hold this office under this condition, otherwise I don't permit it. Our engagement with government, the Imam is explaining, always remember something, your most important element is not power. Your most important element is achieving your goal, which is going to heaven. If by working with this government, I'm not serving the cause of Allah, then it's going to take me away from my main goal of attaining heaven. And that if I am to work with this government and this system, it's through the process of making sure that my priority maintains and that the service, the cause of Ahlul Bayt continues in this process. The final of these techniques that's mentioned in terms of how do you protect the righteous community is hijrah, is traveling, is migrating from one land to another. And that seems to be kind of what we decided to do. It's how we got here, most of us. Hijrah and migration is a permissible technique by which you protect the ideology and was used at all different times. And it was something that, for example, even the mu'mineen used to complain. One believer who would come to the Imam and complain, he says, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, I live in the polytheist lands, and whenever I come back to the Islamic lands, the mu'mineen criticize me and threaten me and make me feel bad and say that if you die over there, you're going to die a polytheist, you're going to be dying one of them. So it says the Imam turns to me and he says, let me ask you something. When you live in the Muslim lands, can you talk about Islam? Can you talk about loving us Ahlul Bayt? He says, certainly not. If I talk about loving the Ahlul Bayt in these lands, they'll kill me. So the Imam says, when you go live over there, can you talk about the cause of the Ahlul Bayt? He says, yeah, nobody stops me. I can live the values of Ahlul Bayt. I can have my majalis. I can do all of my events. And I can invite people to the cause and message and teach them about the message of Ahlul Bayt. So the Imam replies and says, Wallah, I swear that you, if you were to die over there, you would not die as a polytheist. Rather, you would die as an ummah in yourself, a nation within yourself that call to righteousness, and that on the day of judgment, your light would come before you, and how far your mercy would extend that Allah would give you upon those around you. The Imam didn't prevent us from this concept of hijrah, to migrate. It's permissible. And it happened throughout history, which is why, for example, in Morocco, we have Sadat, who migrated there. The Fatimids who migrated to the extremes. The family of Imam Hassan, who was persecuted throughout Arabia, went and became the Tabatabai. They went to the extremes, to the edges of the entire empire and separated themselves to preserve themselves. And many of them are not called Hassani anymore because of the concept of migration. But there's one important thing about migration, and that's referred to the concept of ta'arrub ba'da al-hijrah. Meaning to become someone who is a nomad after the process of migration. And what this means is that after I migrated from my house, I migrated from the Islamic lands, I lost my faith. This is haram. That if by living in a foreign land I lose my faith, I'm not allowed to live there. It's not allowed. Why? Because again, your most important asset is going to heaven. If by living in a land I'm not going to heaven anymore, I can't live there. I have to go to a place that preserves my faith. Which is why the interaction of building a righteous community here is more important than anywhere else. Because if we do this wrong, it's a sin to live here, and our generations will be lost to the message of Islam. And hence this topic of protection becomes a very important element of paying attention to. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight we mentioned the son of Imam Hussain, who is known to have gone out first amongst the Banu Hashim to present the sacrifice. That after all of the companions were spent and the Banu Hashim came to present their sacrifices, a young man comes forward and he says, Ya Rasulullah, Ibn Rasulullah, oh father, give me permission. In not his example, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. My apologies, my majalis are a little bit mixed at the moment. We're mentioning the shahadat of the son of Imam Hassan, Hazrat Qasim. Imam Hassan had 4 sons present in the field of Karbala. Hassan al-Muthanna, a son who was known as Abu Bakr ibn al-Hassan, Qasim and Abdullah. Of these 4 sons that were present, 3 of them were martyred on the day of Ashura. The only one who lived was Hassan ibn al-Hassan or Hassan al-Muthanna, who was injured and was taken away by relatives outside of Karbala, healed and returned back, and the lineage of Imam Hassan continues through him. These other 3 sons, Abu Bakr ibn al-Hassan was martyred on the battlefield, Qasim and Abdullah ibn Hassan. The reason we mention this Qasim is because his shahada is something unique in the history of Karbala. Because it is an example of the extremity of the oppression felt by Abu Abdullah. Look and see that, for example, how Imam Hussain treats this child the night before Ashura. That when the companions gather and they make their oath of allegiance to Imam Hussain lists out all of the shuhada the next day, saying that I will accept from all of you this attribute of shahadat. But he doesn't mention the name of Qasim. So now after everyone breaks up, this Qasim begins to follow his uncle around and say, oh Ammu, why don't you give me permission? Why can't I fight? Ammu, all of my cousins will fight. Everyone will fight for you. Let me fight for you. Qasim is about the age of 13. And understand something, that he has spent his entire cognizant life with Imam Hussain, that he is 3 at the time of the shahadat of his father, and he has been raised by Abu Abdullah. His love for Imam Hussain is the love of a son for a father. Imam Hussain asks him a question to determine that, Qasim, are you being influenced by your cousins? Do you know what you're asking me for? Do you have any idea what you want to do? And he says to him that, oh Hassan, what is death to you? How do you think death is an experience? You see, for those who go into battle, you give them shuja'at, you give them strength and bravery by explaining to them of all the rewards Allah will give them after death. But a child of 13 has no concept of these rewards. So Imam Hussein's question is to see, is this Qasim listening to the words of others and he doesn't understand what they mean, or does this child actually understand what he's asking me for? Qasim ibn al-Hasan says, oh uncle, death to me is sweeter than honey. I'm not afraid of death. Death does not overcome me. The answer he gives is one that is appropriate for his age and understanding of the world. So Abu Abdullah says, I give you glad tidings that tomorrow you will present a sacrifice, and even your cousin Ali Al-Asr will present a sacrifice. Qasim is a possessor of nobility of the family of Rasulullah. He says, uncle, you mean to say that these enemies will enter our tents and that's how Asghar will be shaheed? They'll come in here to our women? How will we withstand this? Abu Abdullah appreciates the integrity of this young man. When the day of Ashura comes and the families begin to present their sacrifice and the Banu Hashim are presenting their sacrifices, this Qasim comes for permission again and again and again and again. He's turned away. Why? Because Imam Hussain will look at him and say that you are the face of my brother. How can I send you in front of this army and this enemy? No, Qasim, I don't give you permission. Until eventually they describe and say that Qasim goes to his mother Farwa and complains, and he says, uncle will not give me permission. Farwa says, your father before his death wrote you a letter and said to open this letter in a time of great difficulty when your uncle is in need. Qasim takes this letter with happiness and proceeds to Abu Abdullah and presents a letter in which it is narrated to have said, هذا من حسن المسموم إلى حسين الغريب. That this is from the poisoned Hassan to his brother Hussein, the Gharib, the stranger, the one who has been left alone. If you knew at the time of the shahadat of Imam Hassan, when Abu Abdullah comforted his brother, he would weep over the condition of Imam Hassan, who had turned green from the effect of the poison in his body. Imam Hassan suffered for 60 days under this poison before he became shaheed. 60 days. And at his end, imagine his color being green and the difficulty he had gone through and what he would look like after 60 days of the effect of this poison. Abu Abdullah wept over him. Imam Hassan would ask and say, oh Hussein, why do you cry over me? He would say, brother, I can see your condition. Imam Hassan begins crying. Imam Hussain says, brother, why are you crying? He says, oh Hussein, I am thinking of that day when you will be alone in the desert, when you will be the one covered in your own blood. In preparation of this day, Imam Hassan had wrote this letter in which he says, هَذَا مِنْ حَسَنِ الْمَسْمُومِ, I am the one who is turned green by poison. But I am writing to you, O Hussein, the one who is gharib and alone in this Karbala. If you find yourself in an extreme difficulty, let this young son of mine go and present a sacrifice on my behalf for you. Abu Abdullah turns to this Qasim and he says, oh my nephew, I give you permission. Qasim's battle in the history of Karbala is unique for two reasons. There are two descriptions that are special to him. One that says that when this nephew finally received permission, he hugged his uncle, thankful for the opportunity. Yet I imagine he was realizing what this meant, that once he leaves his uncle, he will not see his uncle again. And therefore he hugs his uncle in such a description that it says that Qasim hugging Abu Abdullah in front of the army on the day of Ashura began to cry so much that Abu Abdullah began to cry. The two, nephew and uncle, in the field of Karbala held each other and wept until they became unconscious. Until eventually consciousness returns and the boy now prepares to go to battle. The second element that is unique about Qasim is that we actually have a description of what Qasim wore into the battlefield as he went to go fight. That Qasim is that soldier of Imam Hussain, of all of the other soldiers, that they describe what he wore as he went into battle. And they describe and say that he wore the sandals, simple sandals. He wore a long shirt, and he wore a turban that was the turban of his father. The reason they give this description is understand how mazloom this child was and why Abu Abdullah kept delaying and saying, I don't want you to go. Qasim was so young and still immature that there was not armor that could fit the boy. That the boy insisted on going to fight in spite of the fact that he did not possess armor to go. Every soldier of Abu Abdullah wore armor, wore protection, wore chainmail, wore all these elements. But Hadal Mazloom, this innocent oppressed child, had no armor to wear. That the army wrote and said, we saw a child who came to fight us without armor. They describe and say that when Qasim presented in front of the army that he had no horse. He was a young child. He was not intended to be amongst the warriors. That he didn't ride a horse into the battlefield. Others say that he did not walk into the battlefield. The mazloom, innocent son of Imam Al-Asr was that one that they describe and say, we saw a child holding a sword in one hand and running into the army of Umar Sa'd. That he was so excited to have the chance to defend Abu Abdullah with his cousins, that he ran to the army of Umar Sa'd openly in the middle of this battlefield. The army of Umar Sa'd describes and says, هَذَا الْعَجِيبُ, how strange is this, that who sends هَذَا شَقِّ الْقَمَرِ, a sliver of the moon, an innocent child to fight us. Why? Because they could not imagine a child had the understanding of what he was doing. Now understand why Abu Abdullah was asking the boy the question, that you know what you're asking me for? Do you understand what you are going to do tomorrow if I send you to the battlefield? Because that boy, who even the army became astounded to say, why is this child, and he's running at us, said, what do we do with this child? So they described that one of the soldiers of Umar Sa'd, who had 7 sons, said, one of my sons is sufficient. But he did not know that this is son of Hassan the Brave. This is the child prepared by Abu al-Fadil. When this child entered the battlefield, though you saw a child in front of you, this was the blood of the Banu Hashim that stood there. It describes and says this warrior's 7 sons. Qasim ibn al-Hasan killed all 7 of these children and these sons of this enemy of Allah. You would imagine and say that as this boy stood in the battlefield, 2 uncles stood behind him because his father was not there to see the battle. One stood Abu Abdullah, one stood Abu al-Fadil. Abu al-Fadil, the one who had trained the Banu Hashim on how to fight, would see Qasim stand in the battlefield. With anxiety he would pace and say as the champion would come against him, this is a young man, he is a good match for my Qasim, my Qasim will stand. They describe after 7 of these boys fell, then the grown men started to come and fight against this child. I would imagine, as my teacher describes, can you imagine the pain in the heart of Abu al-Fadil? Oh, oppressors of Allah, you are champions and seasoned warriors. My nephew is thirsty for 3 days. A boy of 13 who has come against you without armor, and yet still you come to attack him. But wa Qasima, this Qasim killed 35 of the soldiers of Umar Sa'd. He was not stopped by the difficulty in front of him. They describe and say that through embarrassment, we had no haya to fight a child. We did not know how to fight a child. But subhanallah, the sword of this child, the way it would move, that they didn't know how to conquer him. Until look at the innocence of this boy, that in the middle of his battle, he sees his sandal broken. So he puts down his sword and says, I don't like that my shoe should be inappropriate. I will fix my shoe. Umar ibn Nawfal al-Azadi, one of the enemies and mal'ooneen of the army of Umar Sa'd, turns and sees the child has put down his sword. He comes and he raises his sword and clefts the head of Qasim in one strike. The innocence of a 13-year-old boy. Every soldier, when they would die, would say, Assalamu alayka ya ibn Rasulillah. Assalamu alayka ya Abu Abdullah. But this mazloom is the one who, when he is struck, his reaction is, he says, Ammu, come to my aid. Ammu, help me. What is the heart of Abu Abdullah who runs to the battlefield? They describe and say that Abu Abdullah, when he comes, he sees this Umar ibn Nawfal al-Azadi sitting with a sword on the neck of his nephew. Abu Abdullah says, how dare you? Hussain still lives, you will never perform this indecency. Abu Abdullah in anger comes to strike the man. He raises his arm to block Abu Abdullah. Abu Abdullah severs the arm of this mal'oon. The mal'oon screams out in pain. The army of Umar Asad comes to protect the soldier. The horses run into the field to face off against Abu Abdullah. Qasim laying on the sands of Karbala. His body is trampled in this moment. There are two that are trampled in their life. One is this Qasim. The other looked to Ziyarat al-Nahiya. Sahib al-Asr says, my salam to Abu Abdullah, who when he fell from his horse in the field of Karbala, the horses trampled him in that moment as well. Qasim has the example of Abu Abdullah within him. But look and see that when Qasim is trampled, his life is lost. But Abu Abdullah lived on after that moment, and the Masa'ib continued over Hussain. But the Masa'ib of Abu Abdullah, he comes and separates the army, sits by his nephew and cries. How unfortunate the uncle that his nephew calls to him, but he cannot come to his aid. And when he comes, he cannot assist him. There is a description of Qasim that goes further. They describe and say that when Abu Abdullah carried him back to the tents, he hugged his nephew to his chest, but the feet of Qasim would drag on the ground as Abu Abdullah carried him. هذا جملة في التاريخ. This is in the history. Abu Abdullah carried Qasim, his feet dragged on the ground. They say this doesn't make sense because Qasim was so young and short that he could not wear armor. So how would it happen that Abu Abdullah, a grown man who wears armor, carries a boy and the boy's feet drag on the ground? They say we can only make one of two explanations of this statement that's made in history. Either one, the loss of Qasim was so severe, the back of Hussain was hunched carrying his nephew. The other, they say, this makes more sense. Qasim's body had been stretched by the horses. The body had become into pieces. No matter how Abu Abdullah carried his nephew, he could not raise the body entirely in one moment. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم يا حسين.
يا حسين 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 يا حسين. Oh, my young prince of Karbala, Qasim, where are you? Qasim, where are you? Oh, my young prince of Karbala, Qasim, where are you? Qasim, where are you? Qasim, where are you? Qasim, where are you? Everyone. Oh, my young prince of Karbala, Qasim, where are you?
Qasim, where are you?
Oh, my young prince of Karbala, Qasim, where are you?
Qasim, where are you?
Qasim, where are you?
Qasim, where are you?
She roams the plains of Karbala, looking for her son, his poor Parwa. Qasim, my Qasim, answer me, son.
Qasim, my Qasim, she screams and runs. Oh, my young prince of Karbala.
Qasim, where are you?
Qasim, where are you? Oh, my young prince of Karbala. Everyone, Qasim, where are you?
Qasim, where are you?
Look at this beautiful gown I have sewn, but you're not here, that's why I mourn. Your bride awaits your humble presence. Without you, your mother's pain fractions. Oh, my young prince of Karbala.
Qasim, where are you? Qasim, where are you?
Oh, my young prince of Karbala. Qasim.
Where are you? Qasim, where are you?
Then a beautiful light flooded the ground, and Qasim's voice was heard all around. I'm here, mother, here and here, he said, and to his pieces his mother was led. Oh, my young prince of Karbala.
Qasim, where are you? Qasim, where are you?
Oh, my young prince of Karbala. Qasim, where are you?
Qasim, where are you?
Oh, my great Allah, accept this sacrifice. My pretty flower has now closed his eyes. His pieces have torn my bleeding heart as he moves from me far apart. Oh, my young prince of Karbala. Qasim,
Where are you?
Qasim, where are you? Oh, my young prince of Karbala.
Qasim, where are you? Qasim, where are you?
You had left behind your wedding dress, and the armor of Hassan you dressed. Looking like the moon, you're not worth any less, leaving your mother in her distress. Oh, my young prince of Karbala. Qasim, where are you?
Qasim, where are you?
Oh, my young prince of Karbala. Qasim,
Where are you? Qasim, where are you?
Qasim, I lit for you a candle. From this flame I see your blood trickle, and I watch as this flame won't dwindle, and my eyes watch this candle crumble. Oh, my young prince of Karbala. Qasim, where are you? Qasim, where are you? Qasim, where are you? Qasim, where are you?
Ya Hussain! Ya Hussain! Ya Hussain! Ya Hussain!
Salawat. On the pieces of Qasim they cried, for no one could bear that he died. Least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain. Everyone. Least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain. One more time. Least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain. O lovers of Hassan, come near, as I narrate to you this dear. He was left to defend the Imam and to protect the Deen Islam. So Qasim approaches Hussain in a moment of tremendous pain. The rose of Hassan asked to fight, but how can Hussain risk his light? On the pieces of Qasim they cried, for no one could bear that he died. Least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain. He was of his brother a trust. Hussain could not see him in dust. O Qasim, my son, take a breath. I ask you, how do you view death? His answer we must always keep. His answer caused angels to weep. You know, uncle, I love honey, but death is sweeter than honey. On the pieces of Qasim they cried, for no one could bear that he died. Least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain, least of all Hussain. Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, Ya Hussain, salawat.
Bismillah. Subhanallah walhamdulillah wa la ilaha illallah wallahu akbar. Allahu akbar, Allahu akbar. Allahu akbar, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول